Greetings everyone, and welcome to my review of a little game called Clinical Trial. This game was originally recommended to me by a friend over Discord, and it caught my interest enough to give it a full playthrough. Needless to say, this game really stuck with me, and it's one of the first games I felt a major compulsion to write a genuine review about. Please note that before I get into this game's contents, I must provide some much needed content warnings for what exactly this game contains. This game contains mentions and depictions of violence, suicide, sexual assault, abuse, and stalking. If you believe that you cannot handle these topics, I highly suggest that you do not play this game and you do not watch this video. Viewer discretion is advised. I must also note, do not, under any circumstances or for any reason, harass the developer of this game. If I figure out that you have done so, let it be known that I do not condone this behavior or support it in any way, shape, or form, and I will be deeply disappointed in anyone who engages in such activity. With that out of the way, on to the review. On the surface, Clinical Trial is a slow-burn love story about two people who meet in an unlikely but plausible scenario and form a genuine connection with each other. The game features entirely custom art from the developer, who simply goes by Homie, in a blend of visual novel and RPG Maker gameplay. I must however note that gameplay-wise, Clinical Trial is almost entirely a visual novel, and it uses the term RPG extremely loosely, as there is really no RPG gameplay to be found here. The entire game is reading dialogue boxes between two characters, the vast majority of which are between the main character and Lee, the secondary main character of the game. Speaking of characters, let's discuss the main character, Angel. Angel, to the best of my knowledge, seems to be a non-binary character who uses they and them pronouns. I should note that, as far as I know, Angel's pronouns are never specified in the game itself, as pretty much every character seems to use their name instead of any pronoun to refer to them. If using they/them for this character is somehow incorrect, please let me know, and I will leave some form of notice in this video's description and likely in the form of a pinned comment. Either way, Angel is the protagonist of our story, and nearly all of it is told from their perspective. Angel is a short individual, and if I had to assume, they are in their late teens to early 20s. I would personally place them around 18 to 23 years old, although their age is never specified in the game itself. I am going to assume that they are an adult, however, because if they aren't, then this game would be a whole lot weirder than it actually is, and I would probably never cover it in the first place. The game begins with Angel at a clinic, true to the game's name, here to undergo a clinical trial for a new drug for people with ADHD. Angel suspects they might have it, but ultimately that is not the deciding factor on why they've decided to undergo this trial for this particular drug. Their primary motivator is the $1,000 compensation that is promised for anyone who completes all 8 weeks of the trial. Money that Angel, in their current financial position, could very much use. At some point in the story, it is revealed that Angel is living with their two roommates, who go unnamed. The only thing we know about these roommates is that they are apparently dating, and that Angel feels like a third wheel, intruding on their space as they share living quarters with them. Angel also feels that their roommates dislike them, and they only really tolerate their presence due to providing rent money, which the roommates evidently need. Angel also works a job working the front of a restaurant, a job that causes them significant stress, but one they ultimately work anyway as they haven't much other choice. It pays the bills after all, and some work is better than no work. At the beginning of the first week of the clinical trial, we are introduced to the secondary main character, Lee. Lee is a nurse who works at the clinic, operating the trial for a variety of different patients, of which Angel is simply one of. Their first meeting is pretty standard fare. Lee asks if Angel filled out the form on the back of the ad for the trial itself, to which Angel sheepishly admits they had no idea there was a form to fill out, and simply spent their time doodling on the paper on the bus ride to the clinic, revealing that Angel is a bit of an artist. Lee thinks little of it, and allows Angel some time to fill out the information form before progressing with their trial. After that, the trial begins, with even more standard fare, basic interactions. One thing to note about the first dosage of medicine is that Lee fumbles the script a bit, specifically when asking to touch Angel's arm. Instead of asking if it's okay for him to touch Angel's arm, he says, "I am going to touch your arm," before correcting himself to say, "May I touch your arm?" The fact that Lee's first instinct is to state he is going to do something instead of asking for it is a character trait that we will explore later on in this review, but for now, keep it in the back of your mind. Before long, Angel receives their first dosage of medicine, and then is sent on home before another week passes. There is some in-between moments between weeks, namely where you can see Angel using their phone to look at art online, or text messages. One of these text messages is Angel apologizing for being late to work due to having overslept, showing that they have somewhat of a tendency to sleep longer than intended. Entering week 2 of the game, things are pretty standard. Angel shows up mostly on time, and some further interactions with Lee follow. At this point in the story, this is when Angel and Lee become more acquainted with each other, and their interactions begin to feel, well, less clinical than before. Lee opens up a bit more about himself, and in turn, Angel does the same, expressing concerns with the balance between their work and their social life, their frustrations with living with their roommates, etc., etc. This is where the idea of the slow burn love story begins to take effect. Going into this game, I expected Angel and Lee to probably end up hooking up somewhere down the road, as the developer has made it no real secret that this is the intended outcome for these characters. I did very briefly peruse their Twitter account before playing the game, of which I saw some art of these two getting their smooch on. I'm not typically one for love stories or visual novels, but something about this game caught my attention, so I kept playing. Fast forwarding a bit, there's a moment in the game where Angel arrives to the clinic with a bloody nose, a possible side effect of the medicine they've been getting injected with. Not having anything to wipe the blood off with, Angel meets another character by the name of Adri, a bright and bubbly girl with lots of energy. She offers Angel some tissues, of which they use to wipe the blood from their nose, before discarding said tissues in the trash can. Make a note of that discarded tissue. Angel and Adri have a brief discussion, and they seem to hit it off pretty well, sharing some banter about Lee before Adri ultimately has to leave. I'm not going to spend much time talking about Adri, as she is a fairly irrelevant character to the story, and only really has one major appearance. The only thing we learn about her is that Lee prescribes her medication, of which she jokingly refers to Lee as her dealer, much to his chagrin. Further progressing the story, we arrive at week 6 of the game. This week is notable as Angel shows up particularly haggard and distressed. They are not in the mood for conversation as they were in the previous weeks beforehand, and seem to be in an almost dissociative state. Notably, in this state, when undergoing the process of the clinical trial, Lee, as usual, asks if it is okay for him to touch Angel's arm. This time around, Angel seemingly says no, but Lee continues with the injection as normal, which seems to deeply upset Angel, as from their perspective they did not agree to be touched in any way. They ask themselves if they even said no out loud before resigning to whatever it is Lee is going to do. In these moments, Angel seems to ask themselves some very concerning questions, ones like, why am I like this? After receiving the injection, Angel stumbles out of the clinic, leaving their jacket behind as they do so. Notably, Lee makes no effort to remind them of the fact that they left their jacket, and even more notably, the next time we see him, the jacket is gone. This is the third time one of Angel's personal items has seemingly disappeared while in Lee's care. Earlier, I neglected to mention that Angel spit out some gum into the clinic's trash can, gum of which also disappeared from the trash can in the following week. Logically, this can be excused as Lee simply emptying the trash as one would normally do, but make note of these missing items. I certainly did in my first playthrough, initially jokingly, but I was unfortunately very correct on where these items may have been going. In the following week after, Angel shows back up at the clinic as usual. This week is notable because we learn quite a great deal about both Angel and Lee as characters here. During the standard process of receiving their weekly injection, Lee can't help but comment on the fact that last week, Angel seemed particularly distressed. This leads into a scene where Lee and Angel decide to walk up onto the roof of the clinic, where they enjoy the sunset together and engage in a very personal conversation. During this conversation, Angel reveals why they were so distressed the week prior. Earlier, Angel was unfortunately sexually assaulted by a co-worker, who we will later learn is named Brandon, after they agreed to hang out at his place for a night. Brandon initially made an unwanted advance on Angel that night, and when they attempted to confront him about it the day after at work, he made yet another unwanted advance. Angel breaks down, admitting this to Lee, engaging in a quite great deal of self-loathing, and it is a very realistic and well-done scene. Both Angel and Lee's reactions to the situation are extremely realistic and well-written, and I have to genuinely compliment the writing and character expressions in this scene. It's a shame it will all go to waste very shortly. The following night, we see Angel in their bed, looking miserable, their phone rife with activity from Lee texting them, breaking his own protocol as a nurse as he does so. He texts them, revealing he is very concerned about Angel's well-being, and that he just wants to ensure that they are okay. Angel seemingly never responds to these texts, and the next time the two see each other is during week 8, the final week of the clinical trial itself, and the ending to this game's first half. Angel shows up at the clinic for what they assume will be the final time, except this time over an hour late than their designated time. Despite this, Lee is still there, and in spite of the time discrepancy, agrees to conduct the final trial. After doing so, and writing Angel a check for over $1,000, Lee decides to shoot his shot, and offers Angel to stay at his place for the weekend. I should also note that at this point in the story, it is revealed that Angel was a part of a control group for the ADHD drug, and was being given a saline solution with no effect. They were taking a placebo the entire time. This is why I have not gone into much detail about the drug itself, as it seems largely inconsequential to the story at hand, and it was more of a vehicle for the plot to move forward than it was an actual plot point. Continuing on, now having opened up to Lee, and at the very least considering him a friend and trusting him due to his kind demeanor, agrees to stay at his place for a few days, possibly against their own better judgment. This is where the second half of this game kicks off, and the remainder of the story will take place at Lee's house, a house that is notably miles away from town, and is in a secluded area out in the woods. Now is a good time to mention that during my initial playthrough of this game, I was cracking jokes the entire time about Lee being a secret serial killer, and this setup all but confirmed it. Having arrived at Lee's place, they do what you would expect two people to do at what is effectively a sleepover. In terms of slow burn love story side of this narrative, this is where things get to be what I can only describe as fluffy. Angel and Lee play video games, Angel cooks food for them, they draw together, and even go as far as taking a bath together. A scene I will not show you, as this video is already at enough of a risk of getting demonetized. Not that this scene is particularly explicit, but I think you get the idea. Fast forwarding past all the fluff, Angel and Lee open up with each other even more, and it's at this point in the story that I found myself beginning to actually trust Lee. As if he wanted to hurt Angel in any way, he probably would have done so by now. A point that we will address very shortly. Lee decides to go take a shower, and Angel decides that this is as good a time as any to try and find the broken Wi-Fi router. I should note that Angel has stayed with Lee nearly 3 days at this point, all without any cell service, meaning they were effectively cut off from the rest of the world with a strange-ish man at his home in the middle of nowhere with no way to contact anybody. During their search for the Wi-Fi router, Angel discovers a strange-looking switch just behind Lee's bed. They flick this switch, revealing a hidden compartment in a nearby cabinet. Within this compartment is a shrine to Angel, revealed to both Angel and the player that Lee has been stalking Angel for some time, taking pictures of them without their consent, collecting personal items such as the bloody tissues, gum, and their jacket, and even going as far as making his very own personal doll of Angel. Angel is rightfully horrified at seeing this, their expression being what I can only describe as pure, unadulterated dread. At this moment, Lee reappears, visibly sweating and wearing a similar dreadful expression. At this moment, you, the player, are presented with a choice: reject Lee or accept him. Like any reasonable, sane human being would do, my first instinct upon learning Lee is indeed a massive creep was to reject him. My priority from here on out was getting Angel out alive. I was on the edge of my seat, genuinely fearing for their safety. I must give my compliments for this scene, as I had joked about it beforehand and was given the immediate catharsis of being right the entire time. I had inadvertently predicted this outcome, and I was on board with the horror game that this game was sure to become. I was fully invested in the story, and it had now turned into a full-blown thriller with one objective: escape the Stalker's house with your life intact. After rejecting Lee and expressing their desire to leave, Lee runs off with Angel's jacket, claiming it needs to be washed before they can properly go. With Lee preoccupied, Angel is free to explore the house yet again, with one objective: leave. You can actually go down to the washing machine and retrieve Angel's jacket, to which they will comment that there are some, and I quote, crusty white stains on it. A sentence that genuinely made me gag when I first read it. I cannot tell you if I love or hate this writing. Either way, it sure as hell elicited a response out of me. A visceral one at that. Further on, to progress the story, you must enter Lee's closet where his quote-unquote Wi-Fi router is, or at least what Angel thinks is a Wi-Fi router. In reality, it's actually a signal jammer, one Lee was using to prevent Angel's phone from receiving cellular data, so that they were unable to call or text anyone during their time with him. After disabling the signal jammer, Angel checks their messages, and realizes that nobody texted them in the 3 days they were gone, much to their despair. This scene is interrupted, however, by Angel noticing a hole in the nearby wall, leading down to a basement. With Lee rapidly returning to the room, Angel is left with not much choice but to escape down into the basement, with Lee following closely behind, his intent unknown. Upon reaching the basement, Angel finds a corpse they recognize, the corpse of their co-worker Brandon, tied up in the center of the room. It's clear at a glance Brandon has been murdered, and the culprit rears his head as he stands ominously in the doorway. Angel confronts Lee, asking him why he did this, and Lee confesses to the murder almost instantly, even detailing his methods and motives. His motive was clear. This murder was revenge for Angel, an action that Angel further did not consent to. Keep in mind this reoccurring theme of a lack of consent. Lee often does things to Angel without their prior consent, fully believing he is simply allowed or even obligated to do these things. He murdered Brandon after kidnapping him, drilling a hole in his spine with a power drill, leaving him paralyzed to bleed out and die in agony in a dark basement. Alone and afraid. Needless to say, it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I do not feel an ounce of sympathy for Brandon and generally think he got what he deserved. But the big takeaway here is that Lee committed this murder without Angel's consent, a revenge kill they did not ask for, forcing them into this uncomfortable, deeply disturbing, and twisted scenario, further violating their consent and autonomy more than it already was. Lee is no better than Brandon. He is just another selfish man out to satisfy his own desires, to be with someone he has chosen to obsess over, someone who never asked for him to begin with. Angel even goes as far to say this outright to Lee's face, and they are right for doing so. I was very immensely proud of Angel for standing up for themselves here and calling Lee out on his bullshit. Lee attempts to implicate Angel in the murder, claiming by virtue of seeing Brandon's corpse, they are now an accomplice. They have a clear motive to have killed him after all. Any logical individual would be able to deduce that this is merely another coercion and manipulation tactic on Lee's part. Any self-respecting detective, combined with Angel's testimony, would immediately place Lee as the perpetrator. His shrine to Angel alone would be enough of a smoking gun. That being said, you are presented with yet another choice here. If you chose to reject Lee once, you are only given the option to reject him again. So naturally, that is what I do. I reject Lee again, and he decides in his infinite wisdom that the correct course of action is to commit suicide with a power drill. Lee stands off in the corner of the room and places the drill to his temple, drilling his own brain and slumping over, dead as a doornail. You can leave the room before he does so, but I stuck around to watch him do it, mostly out of my own morbid curiosity. This probably means I ended up traumatizing Angel further. Sorry, Angel. Following Lee's death, Angel leaves the home, assumedly to walk back to their apartment for several miles, hoping the police will believe their testimony, of which they likely will. This is ending 1 of the game. Now, if this were the only ending of the game, I probably wouldn't be writing this review. I would have simply recommended it as a solid piece of subversive, psychological horror that any horror fan would probably enjoy. Hell, I may have even uploaded a playthrough of it to my channel. Unfortunately, ending 1 is not the only ending to Clinical Trial, as it is merely one of 2. The second ending is why I am writing this script, recording this voiceover, and making this video. Ending 2, for all intents and purposes, completely and utterly obliterated my enjoyment of this game, and has left me feeling disappointed and disgusted. Ending 2, also known as the accept ending, is what you'd expect. Angel accepts Lee. They agree to help him cover up the murder. They move in together with a happy cutscene, with hopeful music playing as they hold hands and walk into their new home together to start a new life. This ending, to the best of my knowledge, seems to be treated as the canonical and/or definitive ending of the game. It even gets its own cutscene to detail the events that transpire, and gets a definitive The End title card, while Ending 1 got a simple Ending 1 title card. This ending just feels bad. In Ending 2, the sexual assault victim moves in with their stalker who violated their consent on numerous occasions, but conveniently forgives these egregious transgressions because he's a little bit nice and a little bit charming. It wildly recontextualizes the purpose of the entire game and leaves the experience with what I can only describe as a layer of slime over it. This game was so close to being perfect, hence the title of this review. If it were only Ending 1, or if Ending 2 were changed just a little bit, I would consider Clinical Trial to be a genuinely amazing game, an excellent piece of subversive horror with sensitive but well-executed themes and ideas. But alas, Ending 2 holds back from true greatness. Ending 2 glorifies a stalker and a murderer, engaging in a self-indulgent fantasy that leaves a poor, sour taste in one's mouth after experiencing it. Lee's behavior is undermined, and Angel is prevented from getting the justice and closure that they deserve. Angel falls into Lee's manipulative trap, forever ensnared within the grasp of a man who has proven himself to be very dangerous and very capable. It turns an excellent horror story as to what I can only describe as the author's stalker fantasy good ending. It feels gross. It leaves me feeling queasy and frustrated. Frustrated that such a good game with such excellent writing and realistically written characters could go down such an unfortunate path, making some of the more heavy-hitting scenes of the game almost feel like a waste. All of it is undermined, knowing now what the ultimate, final conclusion of it all is. I will not accuse the author of anything, but I will, however, criticize their direction and writing choices with this game. Now, I know what you must be thinking, dear viewer, and I know. This game was not made for me. It was not meant for people like me. My normie ass stumbled into it blind as a bat, and I was unfortunately met with some upsetting content that was made to appeal to a specific variety of individual. I am well aware that there are many people out there who indulge in fantasies such as this, sometimes as a coping mechanism, mostly out of a simple desire for entertainment. And to that I say, whatever floats your boat, man. I'm in no position to judge. I just wish Clinical Trial was a bit more clear about what exactly the kind of game it was set out to be. On your screen right now is a set of screenshots. These screenshots are the only content warnings this game has. Nowhere is it mentioned that this game is clearly meant to appeal to a specific variety of individual, and if it were, I would have never played this game to begin with. I understand not wanting to spoil the story of a game such as this one, but I must say that a few more specific content warnings would have steered me clear of this game, and saved me much undue duress and disappointment. Ultimately, I do not regret my time I spent with Clinical Trial. It is a deeply fascinating game, with so much potential that is unfortunately squandered, with an ending that didn't need to exist. If you were to ask me how I would have written Ending 2, I probably would have written it as an ending where Lee turns himself in, confessing to the murder and acquitting Angel of any and all suspicion. Angel gets to express the fact that they care about Lee, but also acknowledging that he has done some very, very wrong things, and that he must face the consequences. And if he does truly care about Angel, he will do so, and set them free from his clutches, allowing them a chance at a normal life yet. Alternatively, I would recontextualize the given ending too, framing it as a much darker ending, still keeping the aspects of Angel and Lee moving in together, but in a much darker tone. I would emphasize that this is the worst possible ending for Angel, submitting to Lee's manipulations, doomed to be used and abused by him in any way he deems fit. Because that is ultimately what happens. It is a bad ending framed as a good ending, and it leaves me feeling very frustrated. So, to close off this review, do I consider Clinical Trial to be a good game? Yes, I do. Would I, in good faith, recommend Clinical Trial to anyone? No, I would not. I think I've said all I really can here. Clinical Trial is a deeply interesting game that almost got it all right just to throw it away at the end. It has redeeming qualities, but they are held back by questionable writing choices on behalf of the author. Very avoidable and unnecessary choices. Maybe you love this game, but I am unfortunately just frustrated with it. And I feel the need to warn people about the true nature of this game while also expressing my disappointment and frustration. If you have played the game for yourself, feel free to leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Maybe you can redeem this game in my eyes. As in a way, I do wish to be incorrect about it, but as it stands, this is how I feel and these are my honest opinions. With that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye!